Tim, Corinne Leach, and Josh Williams. The topic we chose was about access to justice issues for persons with a mental illness, and we focused on a criminal setting. Mental illness relates to a clinically diagnosable disorder that significantly interferes with the individual's cognitive, emotional, or social abilities. The mental illnesses we refer to are clinically diagnosed conditions such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, schizophrenia, personality disorders, and mental retardation. So why did we choose this topic? Well, mental illness is one topic that has certainly been brought into the spotlight over the last 5 years. Simply look at the news on any given day, and it's guaranteed there will be articles relating to mental health funding, persons struggling with mental health issues, and the difficulties their conditions have put on their lives. As well as its current prevalence in the media, it has been found that about half of all adult Australians will have suffered some sort of mental illness at some stage of their life. And during any given year, approximately 20% of the population are living with a diagnosed mental illness. These high figures mean that there is a very good chance that the people seeking legal help could be suffering the effects of this illness and may therefore need a different approach from their legal professionals in order for them to achieve the right outcome. This means that the legal professionals need to be aware of the mental illness can have on a person, so they can work to their very best with their clients. Once we started research on this topic, the full extent of the problem in a legal setting was found. We started to fully appreciate the extent and influence of the problem when groups, whose purpose has been to research access to justice issues, such as the Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales, had already highlighted mental illness as being a big issue in their research. These groups found that the relationship between mental illness and other forms of social and economic disadvantage is extensive, and as such have been focusing their research on the difficulties this group of people are having in accessing and using legal help. We realise it is a very important issue to consider in our future roles as lawyers. Finally, due to the amount of information about mental illness, specifying our topic down to being in a criminal setting seemed logical, as the number of prisoners who have diagnosed mental illness was just so much higher than the percentage found in the general population. We did attempt to determine whether it was the mental illness that caused the imprisonment or the illness was as a result. Don't go a little off topic, so it wasn't included. I'll now hand you over to Brittany, who will speak more specifically on the areas found interesting about this topic.
Thanks, Lisa. Many previous studies in the broader literature have identified that people with a mental illness can be some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged in the community. Mental illness is, of course, all around us, and not everyone with a mental illness will have it affect their capabilities for education and employment. However, for many, especially those who experience strong symptoms, the literature has shown that they may suffer the cyclical effects which lead to one another, including studies showing lower levels of education, employment, less stable housing, and higher levels of poverty. One such study detailed the individual barriers faced by those suffering, which prevent them from full engagement with legal assistance and thus access to justice. These often reflect financial and social disadvantage, may stem from symptoms, but are magnified because of external barriers. Individuals may have a lack of awareness of their legal rights, not realizing that the problem has a legal element and a potential remedy. Being disorganized may make it difficult to remember legal appointments or prioritize their legal problem over other situations in their life. They may be overwhelmed and frightened to seek legal assistance. They may be mistrustful of divulging personal information to legal providers, which may prevent the service provider from delivering adequate assistance. They may have communication problems, which affect their ability to seek and receive help. A lack of care and treatment may exacerbate these barriers. Certainly, cognitive impairment does not coexist with every mental illness, as mental illness covers such a broad spectrum of circumstances. However, for those for whom cognitive impairment is a symptom, barriers to seeking help and understanding advice, documents, and processes is a significant barrier. Features of a courtroom environment may also be intimidating to people with a mental illness and may exacerbate symptoms, for example, those with anxiety. Studies suggest that a strategy to be used in addressing and breaking down these barriers includes a more flexible delivery approach to the provision of legal services. Practically speaking, this may include allowing more time for breaks and for explanations. This may help those for whom stress and communication is a high issue. Consultations have suggested the implementation of training programs to promote mental health awareness to court staff, judges, and legal service providers. Two positives can result from this. Legal stakeholders can identify mental illness and also debunk perceptions regarding the credibility of people with a mental illness. These training programs can also be implemented to non-legal service providers to direct individuals to legal services where it's appropriate.
Thanks, Brittany. My name is Corinne Leach, and I will discuss in more detail our focus on the barriers to those with a mental illness accessing justice within the Queensland criminal justice system. In researching the broader topic of access to justice for people with a mental illness, the inequality facing offenders in the Queensland criminal justice system became clearly apparent. Firstly, and arguably most importantly, we found a stark overrepresentation of people with a mental illness in prison populations. This necessarily led us to consider what could be potential triggers for this overrepresentation. As Brittany has discussed, there are of course individual barriers facing someone with a mental illness to engaging with the legal system and its processes. However, another very important aspect also emerged: the systemic barriers that are inherent in the Queensland criminal justice system, and how the identification of an approach to mental illness might change the level playing field we would associate with the concepts of formal and substantive equality. In Queensland, the process applied to an offender who may be suffering from a mental illness is determined by the crime that they are accused of committing. If the crime is indictable and heard in the district court, there exists potential for the offender to be referred to the mental health court. It may then be determined that the offender is not fit for trial, temporarily or permanently, and a period in an authorised mental health facility for treatment may be ordered. However, if the crime is summary and heard in the magistrate's court, there is no equal process available. The current program in place, the Courts Referral Program, replaced previous diversionary courts in 2012 that included the Special Circumstances and Drugs Courts. This program offers offenders a chance to engage with NGOs for assistance, but it is not treatment necessarily, and is conducted outside an authorised mental health facility. The outcomes of this engagement have no effect on the legal process, other than through a report provided to the magistrate prior to sentencing. The Queensland Law Society commented on this change in a media release in September 2012, saying that this move by the government also raises serious justice issues. It is more just and more effective for vulnerable people with specific needs to be treated with sensitivity and given appropriate help. The question then becomes, how can we address these barriers, both individual and systemic, to ensure that, using Lord Bingham's words in his public law lecture on the rule of law, the laws of the land apply equally to all, save to the extent that objective differences justify differentiation. Now I will hand you to Josh to discuss how we might address these barriers and reflect how we work as a group.